On behalf of the College of Sciences Alumni Board, I would like to thank you all for being here. Our board consists of a dedicated group of alumni volunteers who strive to provide valuable networking opportunities and social events for our fellow Knights. Given the current situation, these experiences have been hosted virtually, but we look forward to the days we can get together again on our beautiful campus in person. During the pandemic, we understand the struggles that our alumni and our students are currently facing. And as a board, we wanted to be able to give back in these challenging times. Through tonight's panel event and similar events that we've been hosting, we've been able to gather virtually to share firsthand insights from our incredibly accomplished alumni in a variety of fields. And you are in for a treat tonight. Diana will be sharing more about our alumni panelists momentarily. Tonight's event is a conversation on navigating identity in the workplace. We hope you enjoy this event and will join us for more in the future. So before we introduce our esteemed panelists, I just wanted to go over a few quick housekeeping items. This event is being recorded. Please mute your audio and select speaker view at the top right-hand corner of your screen for the best viewing experience. Following the presentations, we will have a Q&A. At this time, we welcome you to ask the panelists questions. You can also send in questions through the chat throughout the panel, and we hope to get to as many of those as possible tonight. If we run into any bandwidth issues, we might ask you to turn off your cameras. And if you need any technical assistance from Zoom during the event, you can call 1-888-799-9666. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Diana Rodriguez, our chapter's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Chair and the moderator for tonight's event. Diana has been a part of the College of Sciences family since 2016 and graduated in 2018 with her bachelor's degree in psychology. She's committed to helping the community. She loves to travel and learn about other cultures, and she incorporates that into her cooking. So without further ado, let's welcome Diana.
Yay! It's like I gotta applaud myself because it's so weird to just be silent. Thank you so much, Valerie. So welcome everyone. Welcome to our panelists. I'm so excited for our event this evening. Before I actually go and introduce our awesome panelists for this evening, I just would be remiss not to mention that while tonight we may hear some intersectionality or shared experiences, keep in mind that each story shared tonight is coming from a unique individual. So there's a lot of diversity represented here tonight. However, no one person's experience is a monolith for any particular type of diverse characteristics. So just for example, I'm a very proud Colombian American woman. However, I do not speak for all Colombian American women. So just kind of keep that in mind. But with that being said, I'm incredibly honored to hear from our esteemed panelists tonight. So let's get some introductions going. First up, we have Joe Saunders, who's the Senior Political Director at Equity Florida. In his position, Joe leads the policy and political programs for the country's largest state-based LGBTQ rights organization. In 2012, Joe was elected to the Florida House of Representatives, becoming the first LGBTQ state lawmaker in Florida to take the oath of office. As a state representative, Joe served as the lead sponsor of the Competitive Workforce Act, which is legislation that would finally ban discrimination against LGBTQ Floridians. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us. Let the people
Thank
see your
you.
beautiful face. There you go. Hi.
There he is. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Diana. It's a pleasure to be here and to spend time with everyone.
Absolutely. Next, we have Laurito Tellado. Please, Laurita, if I mispronounce your name, do not hesitate to correct me. Laurita is a freelance writer, editor, blogger, and a voiceover artist, and she's the founder of Holding Out for a Hero and Espresso con Leche blogs, as well as the founder and president of the Laurita Spina Bifida Project, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to promote positive awareness of spina bifida and unite spina bifida communities across the globe. In addition, Laurita is the editor of Hispanic PR blog. Welcome. We had some technical difficulties ahead a little earlier tonight, but let me just tell you, Laurita is a champ with the patience of an angel. It's been a year of this pandemic, and you think that technology would kind of work with us, but you never know. That's the beauty of it. Welcome, Laurita.
Thank you. And yes, you got my name perfectly right, Laurita Tejado. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Diana, for that great introduction.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'm very excited to have Andrew Buchanan. Andrew is a forensic scientist with the New Mexico State Police. He previously worked as a forensic chemist with Broward County Sheriff's Office. He received his bachelor's degree in forensic science and technology from UCF in 2015. Welcome. So, Drew, I gotta ask, how many times do people ask you questions regarding CSI Miami? You gotta be honest with me.
Got to be honest, probably more often than you think.
Well, none of that tonight, safe to say, but welcome. Thank you all three of you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We will be, like Valerie mentioned, we are going to get some questions from the chat group. So those who are viewing, please don't hesitate to reach out to the chat. We'll be picking different questions. And if we don't get to answer those questions, we'll do our best to address them in a later, I believe, email access, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me. But thank you all for being here. Let's go ahead and jump into a couple questions to start off. I do see we're going to start off with, basic, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I'm going to go and pick everyone. Tell me your favorite color, your favorite animal. No, I'm just kidding. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your career journey specifically. Let's see who wants to start us off. Not all at once. All right, Joe, I'm locking eyes with you, even though I'm on a computer. So I'm going to have you kick it off. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your career journey?
It's so weird. I saw you making eye contact with Drew, but okay, I'll go first. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the joys of Zoom, which none of us are new to, I am sure. Thank you so much, Diana, for inviting me, and thank you to your full board, who I know are all volunteers, but convening us for conversations that'll hopefully be impactful. My career, well, I'm born and raised from South Florida. I grew up in a suburb just outside of Fort Lauderdale called Coral Springs. And, like a lot of people, when I got out of school, I did a tour of the state and even some universities out of state. And I was drawn to UCF. I was drawn to the big urban, metropolitan research university that was the second largest in the country in terms of students. And I just sort of knew that would be the place that I was going to get anchored and grow and find myself a little. And so I pretty quickly fell into a degree in political science, which I don't think was an accident. I think I've been pulled towards public service and advocacy for most of my life. And it was really at UCF that I sort of found the intersections between that call towards service and my own identity, my own my sexual orientation. It was the place that I found LGBTQ communities first. And for me, it was an organization called the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Student Union that now I believe is called the Pride Student Union. It's gone through a couple of different names. But when I first got into advocacy, gay folks in Florida were banned categorically, legally, from adopting children. There were no non-discrimination protections that protected our community from being fired or denied housing or denied a home loan or discriminated against in public places. Marriage equality was a dream. It wasn't even on the horizon. We were fielding more attacks based on the possibility that our relationships could be recognized, let alone actually winning the right to marry. So it was a little bit of a different time in this work, and I was called towards that work. And so it was engagement in campus advocacy. It was organizing, protests, and we used to do a walk from the student union to the president's office called same-sex hand-holding day, where we would just make a big scene and get a bunch of queer folks and non-queer people to just hold the hand of a same-gendered person, which now seems maybe to some of you a little silly, but at the time it was transformative. It was controversial. It was covered in every newspaper. But we used it as an opportunity to push the administration to create more inclusive policies. So it was that work on campus that really, I think, was the genesis of my career. And we'll talk more about what happened after that, but it led me into professional advocacy. It led me into work in the Florida legislature. It led me into campaign work in other countries, in the UK, in downtown central London. And it's been quite a journey. So I'm excited to share more of that with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. It's really interesting to kind of hear you. And I can't imagine how it must feel being a part of that evolution and just think of like, man, just 5 years ago, just 10 years ago, and just think reflecting on what a difference we've seen and what still needs to get done. So thank you so much, Joe, for being a part of that. Awesome. All right, Laurita, I'm going to kick it off to you. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your career journey?
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Joe, for sharing that introduction to who you are. And I appreciate you all having me, and of course, for the patience for all the tech issues. Yay for Zoom. But I'm Laurita Tejado, as Diana mentioned. I was born in Puerto Rico and raised in Orlando. So I moved from Puerto Rico from the age of 3. Even though that is not the part of my identity that has most shaped me in terms of discrimination or, social issues and societal issues, that is definitely a very important part of my identity as a bilingual Puerto Riqueña. And but I was born in Puerto Rico with spina bifida. Then a few years later moved to Orlando, and so I did all my years of school here in Orlando. I started college at Valencia and then Valencia College, and then transferred to UCF. And I still took most of my UCF courses at West Campus, which really made it a more like smaller community experience, which I'm grateful for. But definitely was very much shaped in this community. But being born with spina bifida, which is considered a birth defect, for lack of a better term, of the spine, where it doesn't close properly, means that I've had already 22 surgeries. I'm 34, and I'm not afraid to say how old I am. And just countless hospitalizations. So growing up, definitely, I experienced a lot of that, and a lot of hospitalizations, and also the social isolation, bullying, the teasing, the misunderstandings that come with kids not really being able to relate to me or understand my experience, which I'm sure is the case for many kids with disabilities. But that really, around the age of 10, is when I really just kind of decided to do something about it. My parents had always been very supportive, but it really just took that moment of when you want to turn anger into action. And I realized that a lot of people weren't aware of spina bifida, and that there wasn't this sense of community around this as there is around other causes that are also equally important, but that I wanted to be that voice for people with spina bifida. And to that effect, I started blogging in 2009. That blog eventually became my inspiration for starting a nonprofit organization in 2014, the Laurita Spina Bifida Project. And that is 100% volunteer-based, and I run that alongside my ever supportive parents, Mirna and Miguel, and we have thankfully operated always from home. So it's been one of those things that we've actually been able to continue working with during the pandemic.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's exciting. I love that you're repping the shirt. Feel free to send me one. I love it. All right. And Drew, it's your time to shine, baby. So
all right.
tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career journey briefly. And then, of course, we do have more questions that will kind of delve a little bit more into all three of you's experience within not only your, current field of work, but even your academic journey. So, just give us a little teaser.
Okay. All right. Well, first things first, my name is Andrew Buchanan, but I go by Drew, and I am 28-ish years old. The only reason I say ish is because I turn 29 next month, so ish, 28-ish. My story is kind of all over the place because I was born here in the States, but I was raised in Jamaica, in the Caribbean islands, until I was about 10 years old. And then I came back to finish off schooling. So I've had the Caribbean experience, and I've also had the Black American experience as well. And how did I come into my field is kind of a weird story too. At first, I really didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. I knew that I was good at science and math, but I really didn't know what to do with it. So like at first I wanted to be a doctor, like everybody else wants to be a doctor, but a doctor of what? Who knows? I knew I just wanted to be a doctor. Then I jumped to electrical engineering because it's what my uncles used to do, and I looked up to them when I was a younger kid. And then like I got to the point where I realized that those weren't what I wanted to do. I was just looking at what other people were doing and trying to emulate that onto myself. So my mom, one day, when we were trying to figure out like what I wanted to do after graduation, like what college I wanted to go to, what field I wanted to get into, she actually likes, the Law and Order, the CSI Miamis, as you mentioned earlier. And she was like, "Oh, why don't you get a job in forensics? That looks pretty cool." And I was like, "Huh, I'll look at that." And then, as luck would have it, I went on a college tour the very next week. And it just so happens that UCF happened to have a forensics program, and they had a kind of like orientation like going on during the college tour. And pretty much from that, like the rest of us, I was sold. The university just drew me in, and I fell in love with it, and the forensics program drew me in. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I figured I'd take up the challenge anyway, and pretty much the rest is history.
I love it. I also noticed your poster in the background. So I see you have a shared love with other famous scientists, which
Yes.
is awesome. That's so great. It's interesting to hear you talk about your identity being multi-layered in the sense of like you have your Caribbean side as well as you mentioned the Black American experience. I definitely I hear that so hard because I'm the first one in my family to be born in the US. Everyone was born and raised in Colombia, and most of them still actually live there. So when I'd visit family over there, you're not Colombian enough because
Yes.
you're the American one, you're the
Yes.
gringa. But when you're here, you're like, well, obviously you're not white or American enough because look at you and you can speak Spanish. So definitely, I
Exactly.
understand kind of little kind of like identity crisis, maybe
Yeah.
potentially growing up. But that I hope, and from what I can hear, Drew, it seems like you've taken all those experiences and just used them as a tool for growth instead of kind of staying stuck in the, well, am I good enough or what's going on? Am I accepted in either of these groups? So I applaud you definitely for forging your own path. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Right. So for our next question, some kind of like tried to segue into it. Did anyone else or did anyone experience an identity crisis trying to fit into an organization cultures? Whether this might be a job that you had, or even a class, or even a volunteer organization. Like, when have you felt kind of like that identity crisis of, oh man, we're this might be clashing, or I feel like maybe I don't fit in with this organization's culture. Drew, I'm going to kick it backwards. I'm going to have you start us off.
Okay. I can't really say like in the world of forensics, we've had an identity crisis problem fitting into different work cultures, because forensics is very accepting of different people from different walks of life and different personalities and whatnot. However, I've never had the pleasure of experiencing that. However, for the places that do that, I would say that, you know, they're not looking out for your best interest, and you probably shouldn't be working there.
Yeah, definitely well put. Laurita, have you ever experienced an identity crisis trying to fit into an organization's culture?
First off, I think what Drew said was very well put. If, of course, I feel it's easier said than done to say, oh, you know, I'm just going to quit this job because I don't fit the culture. But absolutely, I think that it really speaks to one's integrity. If you're, you know, if you, who you are at your core is so strong that you're able to walk away from something that you know you're not a good fit for. I have definitely experienced that, whether first off in just in school in general, just being teased and bullied, and I was the only kid with a quote unquote, you know, disability that I knew in school. You know, the time it was very much a mainstream school, and it was very not adapted. It was a good school. It's a very good school, but it was a good public school, but it was still very much not adapted to students with disabilities. And I think the culture back then was different too. You didn't have kids and parents and educators talking about bullying and about diversity and about inclusion and acceptance in a way that is so assertively and openly being talked about now. I definitely have felt kind of a clash and an identity crisis with organizations, sometimes even organizations that surprise me. Um, my organization, or my mission, my cause. The reason I started a nonprofit is because the only organizations that I knew of in the United States and of the world that are serving the spina bifida community were started by parents and doctors, and I didn't know of any, and still don't know so far, of any that were actually started or launched by an individual living with spina bifida. And I feel like that is definitely a sign of the times, especially when 50, 60 years ago, you know, survival rates for children with spina bifida weren't that high, and you know, we weren't expected to live long. But at the same time, it growing up in the more modern era that I did, it still always felt like I was the kid sitting at the grown-ups table, because I was that kid that wanted to go to every meeting where the parents were, where the grown-ups were, and I wanted to hear what they were saying about us and our health and our future and our well-being. So I definitely felt a clash when it came to whether it was parents or other leaders in the community, where I wasn't always, you know, embraced with open arms because I was that kid that wanted to sit with the grown-ups. But then again, I thought, well, I'm the one here with the first person perspective. Shouldn't I get a microphone here? So I appreciate that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just kind of curious, do you think age kind of played a big factor, that you were the youngin, you know, trying to talk to the parents, and, you know, parents know best, right? So
Oh,
maybe
absolutely. I mean, in a contest of who has more spina bifida, like my parents aren't the kind of people that ever try to win that contest. I mean, I always say that whenever you have any diagnosis, you know, your family carries that too. You know, I sometimes say that with the three of us have spina bifida, um, but they have always been very. I'm always grateful to them because they've always been very respectful of and encouraging of me in having a platform, and making sure that, you know, when a story is told from the spina bifida perspective, they always defer first to my personal experience, even though obviously my entire journey is due to them. But I don't think it was always seen that way in the community, both locally or nationally, because traditionally it is the parents who have had to be the activists for their child in school, and even in trying to get them work if they're able to. You know, now you have more and more adults with disabilities who are doing more of the traditional things, going to college, getting advanced degrees, getting married, starting families of their own. um, but these were examples that we didn't have presented to us when we were kids. You know, I didn't know anybody growing up. As a little kid, I didn't know many people or even have role models of people who were professionals with spina bifida or who had just independent lives. So I think it's again a sign of the times and the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so amazing to hear that you had such supportive parents. I can't imagine how empowering that must feel as a child growing up and, kind of maybe not feeling heard and just having those huge advocates being your own parents and giving validating your experience. So that's amazing. Your parents definitely set that example to empower your children to advocate for themselves and to speak up for themselves and know that they have backup. So I'm so happy to hear that.
Definitely, thank you. And it was I will just say that it was watching. Definitely, both of my parents were very much involved, you know, and whether it was working to support me or volunteering in the classroom. You know, my mom volunteered from preschool to the day I graduated high school. And she was a classroom volunteer on every field trip. And it was seeing her all the time in the principal's office advocating for the quote unquote accessible bathroom to have a lock on the door. From when I was in kindergarten, it was seeing her advocate for me that really just pushed me to be my own activist as well.
That's awesome. Well, I'm sure you inspire many. All right, Joe, I'm going to ask you, I'll refresh the question. Um, oops, sorry, I lost the question. Did you ever experience an identity crisis while trying to fit into an organization's culture at any point in your journey?
Mm. Yeah, I spent some time on this one, Diana, thinking about it in the lead up to today's conversation. I benefit from and have the privilege of having started my career in Equality, Florida, which is where I work today, right out of college. And I think it's certainly possible to sort of inflect and reflect on our organization's culture. But what I was really drawn to when I was thinking about this was really my experience in the Florida legislature. Because your question really zeroes in on this question of culture and how we as people of intersecting identities, of people who have experienced marginalization in our lives and sort of are constantly like dealing with that invisible strata of access and power and all the different ways and all the systems that we all navigate through, create barriers to those for people who aren't the majority, right? I feel like my entire career has sort of been called to challenging culture. I think of myself as a warrior for the soul of culture more than I am an operative or a lobbyist or a political director or whatever. Like these are all tactics that are really at the end of the day about calling people into recognizing the margins and recognizing who lives in those margins and what it means when we don't see them as a community and as a culture and a society. So that was actually what called me to run. I mean, it was a driving force for why I felt like when a brand new legislative seat was drawn that finally like compacted the UCF community, which was my alma mater. It's where I have 3 degrees from. Like when a new legislative district was drawn over that and the opportunity for a young progressive who could represent a super young district, that area of UCF, that legislative district has some of the youngest voters in the state. And we all kind of looked around and I started hunting for a candidate. It wasn't long before everybody I was asking pointed their fingers back at me and said, well, why don't you run? And the thing that tipped my decision to do this thing as a 29-year-old, Drew, I think I was about your age when I decided to run for the legislature and take on this super intense job. The thing that got me there was the understanding that there had never been an LGBTQ person elected to the Florida legislature before. And when you marry that to the reality that every single year, and this is still true today, conservative forces in the legislature were introducing bills, policies, ideas that were intended to demean queer people, to marginalize them, to reenact policies that we had won overturning in the courts, like us not being there and sitting in that space, it kept us out of the room. And, you know, there's that saying in politics, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. That's what called me to run, was this sense that the culture of that space needed to be challenged in a really fundamental way. And so that is, you know, when I got there, I experienced all of that. I experienced everything that you would think it means to be the first person bringing that experience and perspective into the room. I was constantly told that I was being too gay. I was constantly told that I was talking about my community too much. And there were even ways that it sort of manifested, and maybe this will resonate with people on this call. There were ways where the culture, I was sort of shocked by how the culture created barriers that I didn't expect. For example, there's this sort of thing that happens in the Florida legislature, this obsession with college football. There's this obsession with FSU football and the Seminoles and the Gators and their like rivalry, and everybody talks about it all the time. And it becomes this connection that people have. It becomes this thing that allows people to create relationship with each other. And in the legislative process and in politics, relationship is currency. It's how you get things done. Well, I don't like football. Sorry, I don't. I don't like football. I don't care. And not only do I not care, the reason that I don't care is because in a lot of ways, those kinds of sports spaces are like the anchors and roots of my trauma. You know what I mean? Like being a queer kid in middle school whose dad wanted them to play football. Like all of that baggage is connected to why I don't care about football. But not being able to engage in the conversation around that, not being able to find that space to sit in with Republicans or other even Democrats and create relationships that then becomes currency that then translates into power. Those were ways that the culture of that process was distant from me. And there's something in that. There's something in challenging that. There's something that I think is universal about that, especially for those of us of intersecting identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I get it. I never went to a UCF football game, even though I told myself I should go once just for the experience. And the next thing I knew, it was graduation day.
There are football fans on this call who are revolting. I'm sorry.
You're like,
Sorry,
they ended the Zoom call as soon as you said you don't care.
I know, I'm getting kicked off. It's fine.
Joe, I have a question for you. Since we heard Laurita talking a little bit regarding this question, what would you say was one of your biggest obstacles, if not the biggest, that you had to overcome in your journey, and how did you overcome it? Especially since I'm hearing you say you kind of have the cards stacked against you for a myriad of reasons, but even just like you said, those connections are currency. You know, how do you overcome those kinds of obstacles?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this question too in the pre-materials that you sent us. I mean, I would sort of pivot a little bit to say that you know, my career, my work is very called to. I hear Laurita, you talking about this too, Drew. I've heard you say, you know, that I hear everybody saying in their own way that they're called into public service. They're called into making the world better. And I think for those of us who are sort of, you think there's a reason for us to be here and that you see problems around. I mean, our UCF education, it was the place where my consciousness was raised. UCF was the place where I learned enough about the world, frankly, to see just how many problems there were and to see how many things weren't working. Like I sort of knew it in my bones. I experienced it. I could see it in the people that I loved, but to sort of understand the systems, which then allow you to prescribe solutions, which then you feel obligated by being a moral person who cares about the world to go activate, right? To like actualize. I think a big obstacle for those of us called into public service is pacing. It's to understand that rhythm of picking it up and putting it down, and not to just sort of like be overrun by it. I think that's very true in the nonprofit advocacy space, in the nonprofit space, and the advocacy space, in both. And so, you know, it's a place where it's a kind of I wanted to provide something that I thought might be helpful to people. I know your prompts have sort of been like people at the beginning of their career. And that is one of the things I would give folks. Like, you have to pace yourself in the work that you do. You can't carry the whole world. You can't run towards every fire. You can't run every campaign. You can't start every nonprofit, right? Like, you have to find the balance because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And if you don't, you'll burn out. And that's how careers end. You know what I mean? It's how people hit walls. pivot. You may realize you don't want to do what you're doing anymore and pivot on purpose, but there's a difference between that and burnout and taking on too much and carrying too much, even as you are pulled into service.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Drew, I'm just curious about what was one of your biggest obstacles? And I know we are talking about predominantly like your current fields that are in, but feel free to answer this question if it applies to like when you were still an undergrad or when you were in middle school, like what are some big obstacles that you had to overcome to finally get to where you are now? Or if you're currently going through an obstacle that keeps you from getting to where you want to be.
Well, I guess like there's like many different obstacles that I've had to go through to come here. Like identity wise, myself going through the Black experience in America. It's not always the greatest thing in the world, because there's just so much trauma that's been built up for the past 400 years that it affects every single generation. And, I believe every Black person can resonate with the fact that there is always some form of trauma that you have to deal with. And it may not always come from you. Sometimes it may come from your parents. Sometimes it may come from the experiences that you experience out in the street. Like I've been like discriminated against before without people even knowing me. I've grown up thinking like, damn, maybe I'm not good enough, when it comes to certain things. But I had to learn to basically love myself and have confidence in myself to move past that and know that I don't have anything to prove to anybody. The only thing I have to do is just go out there and do what I can do for me, and make myself proud of me and make my family proud of me, and just not to worry about that. I would say that for my career, it's a multi-layered obstacle for my career. Because the first obstacle for me career-wise is public speaking. Because one of the facets of my career is that I actually have to go to court and testify in front of judges, lawyers, and a jury about all the cases that I work and all the stuff that I analyze. And at times it's very nerve-wracking, like you have to go up there in front of everybody and you have to talk about yourself. And Lord knows I hate talking about myself.
That's why you joined us tonight to talk about
Right.
for an hour.
Right. No, stuff like this actually helps out a lot. So I appreciate you guys inviting me to this. But yeah, no matter how much training you may get on public speaking, at the end of the day, I had to learn that you're the one who has to control how much those butterflies in you fly. Like you're in control. And you won't know that until you're in the moment and you make yourself do it. So that was one obstacle that I had to overcome. Another obstacle that I had to overcome career-wise is like knowing how far to go. In my work, I have to my opinions hold a lot of weight when it comes to going to court. And I have to balance the fact that like I'm always under pressure to get stuff right, like because somebody's freedom hangs in the line based off of what I say. I have to make sure that I get this right. I have to know my craft and know the science behind it, because that determines whether somebody goes to jail for years, so there is pressure that comes with that. Other than that, I would say that that's pretty much the most of what I've had to deal with so far. But it's as Joe said before, you just have to pace yourself, like, go at your own pace and, just do the best you can.
Yeah, thank you. Larita, I'm going to throw it back to you. I know you had mentioned a big obstacle was obviously not only your age, but the preconceived notions of the very people who are supposed to be helping you kind of, not taking you seriously enough. Would you say that's the biggest obstacle, or what are some other, the biggest obstacles you've had to face?
I think that, but also really just, and this sounds very vague, right? I'm gonna like blame everything on society. No, it's not entirely society in general, but ableism is a very much evolving term, and there's a lot of disagreement even within the disability community itself, probably especially within the disability community, of what terms to use. Like, I don't like the word disabled, but a lot of people that I know with disabilities do. So it just depends on what each individual's opinions and experiences are. But still, I would say it really is from the outside, whether it's it extends from kindergarten to up until now. I'm 34 years old, and I still face social ostracism and social exclusion. This is 2021. It's surprising to me that this is still very much a thing, and it's something that has definitely been a cause of great pain in my life, but it's also been, I think, kind of an experience that has taught me more empathy, not just with people with spina bifida or other disabilities, but definitely in general, just realizing that other people are ostracized for different reasons, or for different excuses. So it's not just me who's going through it. Right now, obviously, we're in an experience where everybody's kind of been cut off from their social circle and in person. Ironically, it's in my early 30s or that I started to find closer friends, very close friends, and people that I can hop on onto Zoom with on a Friday evening, and have like a little happy hour. So I think the biggest challenge in that respect was to find the people in my life, the tribe or several tribes, because it's okay to have several tribes of people that maybe don't have every single thing in common with each other, but who support and validate each other. And I think that's where I have struggled the most. But I'm beginning to really find that now.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I keep muting on and off because my HOA has decided to start fixing the roofs without any notice. So yay, love Zoom calls. Never a dull moment, folks. It's like live theater. All right, so I do see some audience questions, so I'm gonna read them out. The first one is, what are some ways that I can ensure the boundaries I set at work are respected? Lorita, since I have you on my little panel, how about you kick us off with that?
Boundaries at work. Okay, well, that's a great question. It really depends on what the setup, I think, of your work is. For example, I do social media management as a freelancer, so I pretty much work from home. So in terms of say the COVID-19 pandemic, not much has changed except that I have less client work now, because less people are hiring. But in terms of boundaries, I think, and this was true for me as a professional before the pandemic, but now it's true for even more people. And it's knowing when to shut everything off, just not literally shut your phone off or your computer off, but definitely know when to sign off, when to not check your email. If it's midnight, if it's 1 a.m., I have no business having to be checking, my email and responding to a client at that hour. So I think just building these boundaries so that you and your client or your employer or your colleagues have that understanding that, okay, so even if we're in a pandemic and I'm working from home, 5 p.m., I'm proverbially out the door. So I think that's been one of the most challenging things for me, and definitely for many of us now, just knowing when to press pause, because the society really does value productivity and work ethic above all, but just really taking that time for self-care. I don't think that it can be overemphasized.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I definitely agree. I have a background in industrial and organizational psychology, which is just a fancy way of saying I like the psychology of the workplace environment. So there's definitely a lot of unlearning almost as I've grown in my field and my research. Like you mentioned, our current society in this country and many countries, you're valued at what is it, the job that you do, or how much of it can you perform. So just keeping in mind that might be what your job values, but you got to think about what do you value as yourself and as a person, not to get all Oprah-y on you guys and you all. So Drew, same question, like how do you ensure that the boundaries that you set in the workplace are respected?
I can only speak from my experience because it's, as Larita said, it's based on like how your workplace is set up. Like I would say, like, to make sure that you have the right boundaries set, you have to make your grievances heard, whether that to be your supervisor or the people around you. Just if there's an issue, or if there's something that you need, or if you just need some space, just let it be known. Like, don't be afraid to speak up about what it is that you want, because at the end of the day, your workplace is there to take care of you. The people around you need to know like how you are, and like how to work with you. So if you have like boundaries that need to be set, just don't be afraid to speak up and let it be known.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, what about you? What can you tell the babies out there?
Babies, I'm surrounded by babies. You said Oprah. I'm going to Oprah because all things begin and end with her, don't they? So Oprah tells us two things that I think are really instructive. And let me say this is being facetious, but it really is. It is filtered through a career that has sort of led me from being, a junior field organizer, opening up Equality Florida's very first field office, its very first sort of satellite office in the closet, the backroom closet of the Orlando Gay Lesbian Community Center, through a couple of different gigs, and even now helping, as a member of the senior executive team, lead a 40-person staff. So I sort of have I think this applies through every lens that I would bring, but what Oprah says, she sort of says two things that I think are some of her most famous. One is, you teach people how to treat you. And I think that's true as an employee. I think that you set the boundaries. This is a lot of what I think you were just saying, Drew and Larita as well. You set the boundaries for how people will engage with you in your professional life. And so if you are signaling that you're willing to respond to emails at 12 o'clock in the morning from your chaotic boss, me, who needs to get it out of my brain in order to survive into the next day, then I start to treat you like somebody who's going to respond to emails at 12 o'clock in the morning. And so there's a way that you have to stand up for yourself. You have to advocate for what makes you the best version of yourself at work. And the second thing that Oprah says, which technically Maya Angelou told her, and then she told all of us, is
I love how you have faces with Maya. Love it. Go on.
love it, is the first time somebody shows you who they are, believe them, right? And so that can feel sinister, but it also can just be true. It can just be true that the agency that you work in may be driven by its mission or its culture or any number of factors to be unable to meet the expectations that you're setting that make you happy. And don't wait. I mean, there is you sort of all know if we're going to fit, right? There's sort of like this, there's data and science behind this. You sort of know within the first year, maybe two, whether or not the culture of an organization works for you, and whether or not you can change it or it'll change you. And the first time that your culture of your workspace shows you who they are, you got to believe them, and make the assessment and decide whether or not it works for you.
Absolutely. I agree with kind of to sum up your second point, kind of go with your gut. I've noticed I was in the shortest place I ever worked at was 3 months, and I ended up, just crying or having to pep talk myself before starting my shift. And I'm like, I don't think that's a good sign that maybe this is the place to be. So just listen to your gut, definitely. I will want to just quickly answer that question as well from a more technical perspective, from someone that's dabbled in the HR side of things. So for the most kind of more technical things, I kind of heard the three of you speak about the things that you can control, or the things that are in your control. But regarding boundaries that aren't being respected from outside forces, whether it be a coworker or a manager or supervisor, that's always that awkward position when you feel like you're being disrespected at work, or someone's making you feel uncomfortable, or something inappropriate is happening. Definitely, we had this old saying at my old job that leave a paper trail. So email your I would, if you have an issue with a coworker, and it's safe enough for you to confront them head on, take them to a quiet place, ask them if they can talk, and then just express using a lot of I statements. So not putting the blame on it, but like, this is how you make me feel, and these things I used to think prior to graduating, like, these are so cheesy, but they work. They're cliche for a reason, because they do work. So expressing yourself in a way that you keep it central to how you feel. And just know that wherever workplace you're in, there are like ladder steps you can take. So the first, I would recommend confront that person that made you feel uncomfortable head on, if it's safe enough. And if not, then you'll again paper trail it, email that person, hey, I just want to recap what we talked about. And if you need to CC a supervisor because nothing is getting done, that's just a tip that no one loves to be tattled on, but it's also, we need to reframe our minds to, I'm not tattling, and I shouldn't feel guilty for advocating for myself that I feel uncomfortable. We need to remove that guilt of, well, I don't want to get someone in trouble. If it's not just a misunderstanding, it's something a little more nefarious. Just having the courage to know that your HR team's got your back. Again, document everything, because you never want a he said, she said situation. So again, email is, in today's day and age, email is the receipts that you might need for a future issue. And then, of course, if you need to keep escalating, reach out to HR directly. But everything, have it in email or handwritten to make sure that you have document to show that your boundaries are not being respected and that you have tried addressing it. And someone somewhere has let you down on that. So that's just, again, the HR technical side of it. You utilize your resources; they're there for a reason. Last question. Thank you guys. Like, I don't want us to end, but I'm gonna give you your last question. I do have an audience question. What was the most helpful advice that someone gave you that has shaped and impacted your journey in navigating your identity across all aspects of your life? So thank you, Samantha, for that heavy hitter of a question. I love it. Who wants to start us off? Drew, I'll give you some time. Don't worry. I see your face that you got your thinker on. Larita, do you want to kick us off? No pressure. Feel free to chew on it if you need to.
So best advice that I got.
That you got that shaped you or impacted you in your current journey.
I'm not sure if it was specific advice, but definitely probably the most life-changing thing, because I had started my nonprofit organization, which in and of itself was terrifying, overwhelming, and life affirming and intimidating, all of that. But in 2010 or something like that, before I even was dreaming of starting a nonprofit, I was a blogger in the spine of and blogging in the spine of the community, but really for whoever could read me in the whole world. And I received this Facebook message from a young man in Uganda, and he's an occupational therapist there. And this was back in 2010, so this is over 10 years ago. And he reached out to me and talked to me about all the kids with spina bifida that he in Western Uganda that he he serves and that he works with, and he goes to their houses, and definitely a different situation than the one I grew up with, and the access to healthcare and other privileges I've been able to have. And he said he would love it if someone like me, with spina bifida, were able to visit his country and meet his kids. And I remember that day I just shut my laptop for a moment and just started bawling. I started just crying and crying because I thought, I wanted to be able to just take off and do that, which I haven't had the opportunity to yet. But cut to 2021, my nonprofit has been able to connect using the power of social media, just like we are today using the power of technology. I've been able to connect to organizations in Belgium, in France, in Dominican Republic, in Uganda, Tanzania, Nicaragua, and my nonprofit has humbly raised some funds, but been able to send several $1,000s to different organizations, including Uganda, which we just finished sending them a total of $11,000 to build an accessible school for children with disabilities over there. A country that I've never visited, with people that I've never gotten to meet face to face. So, that was kind of, when that pivotal moment, we've been talking about the word pivot, and that was literally a pivotal moment for me, because I realized that even though I felt like I couldn't take off and go and visit them at that moment and just, have that face to face that I wanted with them, that I was able to, from here, do something, and maybe even do more for them than if I just got on a plane and, spent my money going there. So to me, that was such a life-changing moment, because now I have friends in different countries, friends in the spina bifida community, parents, healthcare workers, educators, people who advocate for these kids, who will hopefully become adults, who are empowered and have access to things that I've had access to. But it starts with that initial contact. It starts with that what if, and it planted a seed in me and in my family to do something that we had never really dreamed of doing.
There we go. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That's so exciting, and I'm rooting for you to get to do your trip and share the good word that is the Laurita Spina Bifida project. So Drew, I'm gonna ask you now. What's this? I won't even get it so wordy. Just what's the best advice that you've received that has shaped you or impacted you?
The best advice that I
No,
would say
you're the
that
last
I've,
one, so you gotta take us home with it.
all right, let's do it. Let's do it. I would say that the best advice that I've received, coming from somebody else that was my mentor, and also coming from my experience within the workplace, is that not everybody in the workplace is your friend. Like, you may come across some genuine people that may become your friend in real life. Like, I've come into contact when I worked at BSO. That's where I met somebody who ended up, becoming my god brother. I'm the godfather of his children. We just become that close. And then there are other times where, like, you have to remember that your coworkers, at the end of the day, they're not your friends. As much as you may work with them every day, as much as you may be with them every day, you guys are trying to accomplish the same things, have the same goals in mind. You may believe in the same thing, but at the end of the day, they're just people that you work with at times. And I had to learn that very, very slowly, because by nature, I'm a very chill person by nature, and I'm very accepting, and I'm very diplomatic. I accept everybody from their different walks of life and different beliefs and whatnot. So that was kind of a challenge for me that I had to understand for myself. I had to play the game of navigating through different people's personalities to try to gauge, like, what it is that they want. Because as much as you may want to work with everybody and want everything to become cohesive, that doesn't translate to them wanting to work with you. So You know, even myself, I've been previously put into a position where it was my word versus my supervisor's word that could have possibly exposed a lot of mistakes. And, you know, this was a person that, you know, that I looked up to and took care of me while I was there. And, you know, at the end of the day, they said, hey, like, whatever happens from this point forward, it's nothing personal. I just have to do what I have to do, you know? So you just have to understand that in the workplace, you're gonna come across those moments where you think somebody is your friend, but they might not be.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Lessons learned, and sometimes that lesson can be learned the hard way. All right, Joe, I hate to put the pressure on you now because we're a little over time. So I'm gonna have you sum it up. You got this. Go.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'm going to change that. I'm going to change one word in that question, which is, I'm going to take the "your" out of it for me, because I think I think sort of the central question of the panel. I think that you set up, Diana. What is the most helpful advice someone gave you that has shaped, impacted your journey in navigating identity? And I have a few thoughts about it. You know, it was at UCF that I didn't mention this, but I was a women's studies minor. I think I've talked a little bit about how it was really in the academic space on campus that I really began to understand what systems of oppression are. That, you know, to really understand what is racism, what is homophobia, what is misogyny, what are these different things, these systems of existing, of structuring culture and economy and the rules and law that sort of disadvantage some people over others. What does inequality really mean? It was really at UCF that I began to fully understand that. And I think that's the best advice I've ever gotten in my career. And I've done a lot of anti-racist work. I've done a lot of anti-oppression work, both looking inward, kind of personal work that looks at your organization and how it structures itself, work that looks at like systems like government. And one of my big takeaways from that process actually came from my boss right now, the executive director of Equality Florida, Nadine Smith, who is a Black lesbian raised in Panama City, Florida. So she's got her own unique perspective on these things. And she just said, Joe, you know, these monsters that we fight every day, racism, homophobia, sexism, these systems that we are trying to win the soul of America from, they existed for hundreds of years before we all got here, and they're going to exist after we're gone. And there's something sobering in that, because it just shows you the weight of what it is that we all are trying to do. And it kind of guides you towards a couple of planks that I think can be helpful, like go slow to go fast. You're not going to solve this in a day. You can't rush to the finish line in the discussion within your organization or even amongst yourself about how you dismantle ableism, right? Like you got to take that at a paced rate. I think other things that really anchor me as a person of privilege, like I've talked about intersecting identities, but here's the reality. I'm also white. I'm also a man. Like I benefit from some of these systems that I am sort of morally opposed to, but also in different ways, you know, I get privileges from. And so those blockers can kind of be put up a little bit, and it can make it like you can sort of not always know how to engage in the conversation, how to engage with people who report to me while you're trying to figure out if you're doing it right. And this one comes from Brene Brown, if y'all like her, who I'm obsessed with too. But she always says, you know, I'm here to get it right. I'm not here to be right. You know what I mean? It's one of these anchoring North Stars that I think you can bring into your work. So like my summary, I don't know if that was as summarizing as you wanted, Diana, but it's sort of like the work to dismantle the systems that disadvantage identity is enormously complicated work. And it manifests in the world that we're in all the time. You can't turn on the news and not see the ways that like racism and homophobia and misogyny and transphobia and ableism are sort of inflecting into culture. And not everybody's willing to see it. Not everybody's willing to name it. But for those of us who are, you got to know that these are enormously complicated machines, and we're all called into the work of dismantling them. And it takes time, and it won't always be perfect. and sort of the way you step into the space will matter, right? But as long as you do it, you know, with an intent that is pure and with a goal of doing it right, the world will be better.
Absolutely. Amen. I'll give you an amen to that. All right. Well, thank you, the three of you, for taking your time out of your very busy schedules. Thank you for humoring me. I hope I can add 3 new contacts to my LinkedIn. It was a pleasure speaking with you all. I'm going to pass it off to Valerie, and she's going to wrap us up.
Yes, I'm so sad to be putting my camera on now after getting to hear all of these great insights. I have nothing as exciting to say as any of our amazing panelists, but truly I want to thank all of our panelists. I want to thank our wonderful moderator, Diana, as well. This was a really fantastic conversation, and I think one that really needed to be had. And I can say probably for the whole group, I'm sure everybody learned quite a bit from today's conversation. And so wanted to thank all of you for being a part of this event today and for sharing your wisdom with us. As a reminder, we'll be sending out, we've been recording, we're going to send out a post-event email with a survey. Let us know what you think about the event and other events like this in the future. We'll also have the recording that's been going on today, so you can watch this back or share if you have a friend that maybe wasn't able to attend or someone that you think would really benefit. I know I'm going to be sharing this out with quite a few of my contacts and hopefully making a few more LinkedIn contacts as well from today. Now, if you'd like to stay connected with the chapter, we've got a lot of exciting things planned, as we get into the new year, hopefully getting back to in person at some point. But to keep up with what we're doing, I included the Facebook group and the LinkedIn group for the College of Sciences Alumni chapter in our chat. So feel free to join either or both to keep up with what we're doing, share your alumni news. We want to know what you're up to. And thank you again so much for tuning in today and for participating. Stay safe, go Knights, charge on, and we hope to see you all soon.